Money means nothing to him. She said it the way people say things they have rehearsed enough times that the words have lost their weight. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table we had bought together at an estate sale in Franklin 11 years ago, the one with the uneven leg I had shimmed with a folded matchbook and never gotten around to fixing properly. She had her coffee. I had mine. The oak tree outside the window was doing what it does in September, dropping acorns on the tin roof of the woodshed one at a time, each one landing with a sound like a small decision being made. She said his name was Garrett. She said he was genuine. She said she had never felt this way before, and she needed me to understand that this was not something she had chosen. It had simply happened. The way she described it made it sound like weather, like something that had moved through her without her consent or participation. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I told her I understood. Then I stood up, took my coffee, walked out to the porch, and opened my phone. Those 3 texts to Dennis are the reason I am sitting on this porch now in October, with a cup of coffee and a life that is entirely mine. But the texts only make sense if you understand what I had been building quietly, while my wife was deciding money meant nothing. My name is Cal Merritt. I am 49 years old, and I build custom cabinetry out of a shop behind my house on 11 acres outside of Leapers Fork, Tennessee. I have been doing this for 23 years. I started with a used table saw, a borrowed router, and a truck I owed more on than it was worth, and I built the business the way you build a cabinet, joint by joint, fit by fit, nothing moving until the previous thing was set. I am not a complicated man. Coffee strong, cast iron percolator, the same one my father used before me. The first hour of morning in the shop before the phone starts. The oak tree in the side yard, which was there before the house and will be there after it, and which drops acorns on the woodshed roof every September, like a clock keeping its own time. Sandra and I met at a friend's wedding in 2009. She was 31, I was 35. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant she was good on the phone, and good in a room, and good at making people feel like the conversation they were having with her was the most important one happening anywhere. I fell in love with that. Most people do, until they realize it is a skill she applies evenly to everyone, not a feeling she reserves for them. We got married in 2010 at a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Brentwood. 14 people, good food. My father gave a toast that was 3 sentences long and contained everything necessary. Her mother cried. Her father shook my hand and said, "Take care of her," which I understood as both a request and a warning. We did not have a prenuptial agreement. This matters for what comes later. In 2010, the cabinet business was doing well, but not spectacularly. There was no obvious reason to structure anything formally. We were 2 people in love with a reasonable amount of combined assets, and the assumption, which seemed solid at the time, that what we built together would stay together. That assumption held for a long time, and then it did not. The business is the whole story underneath the story, so I need to cover it before I get to Garrett. By year 5 of the marriage, Merritt Custom Cabinetry had 12 employees and a reputation in the Nashville market that was bringing in jobs I would not have believed possible in 2010. High-end residential, commercial kitchen work, a hotel project in Midtown that took 18 months and changed the scale of what I thought we could do. Revenue was climbing in a direction I tracked carefully and discussed with my accountant twice a year, and did not discuss at the dinner table because I had grown up in a household where money stayed out of dinner conversation, and the habit had stayed with me. This was my mistake. The foundational one, though not the only one. Sandra knew the business was doing well because she lived in the house it paid for, and drove the truck it bought, and took the trips it funded. What she did not know was the number, the actual number, what the business was worth on paper, what the accounts held, what the structure looked like. She did not know because I did not tell her and she did not ask. By year 10, Merritt Custom Cabinetry was valued at just under $2.1 million by the business broker I had consulted quietly as part of a general estate planning review. The valuation was based on revenue multiples, equipment value, and the client pipeline, which at that point extended 14 months forward. $2.1 million in a business that Sandra thought of as a cabinet shop behind the house. I had also, in year 8, on the advice of my attorney Dennis Kale, restructured the business as an LLC with an operating agreement that separated my personal assets from the business assets in ways that were legal, standard, and which Sandra had signed as a formality as part of the annual filing without reading in detail. That part I am not proud of. She should have read it. I should have explained it. We had developed a comfortable division over the years. She handled the household accounts, I handled the business, and neither of us had pushed very hard into the other's territory. That division felt practical when the marriage was working. It felt like a different thing entirely when it stopped. Garrett appeared in year 13. I did not know his name then. What I knew was a change in pattern. Sandra had always been social, always had friends, always had a full phone. What changed in the spring of year 13 was the quality of her attention. She was present at dinner, present on weekends, present in all the ways you can be present without being there. The phone had a different energy, the way she carried it, the way she angled the screen. I am a man who works with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. I notice when something is off by a fraction. I did not confront it immediately. I sat with it the way I sit with a joint that does not feel right before I can see exactly why. I waited. I watched. I said nothing. In July, I found out his name from a mutual friend who mentioned it without knowing what she was mentioning. Garrett. Sandra had introduced him to this friend as someone from her sales conference. The friend had met him twice. I still said nothing to Sandra. Instead, I called Dennis Kale. Dennis has been my attorney for 16 years. He is 63, has an office in a converted Victorian on Main Street in Franklin, and drinks his coffee black with the seriousness of a man who considers it a non-negotiable. He listened to what I told him for about 4 minutes without interrupting. Then he asked me 2 questions. The first was whether I wanted to save the marriage. I told him I did not yet know the answer to that. The second was whether I wanted to be prepared regardless of the answer. I told him yes. That was July. By September, when Sandra sat across from me at the estate sale table and told me money means nothing to him, Dennis and I had been working for 8 weeks. What I texted Dennis from the porch that evening, while the oak tree dropped acorns on the woodshed roof. First line, close the joint checking and savings, today. Second line, file the deed transfer removing her name from the personal property. We had discussed this. Third line, send the letter. The letter was something Dennis and I had prepared across those 8 weeks. A formal notice to Sandra that I was invoking a clause in the LLC operating agreement, a clause that had been there since year 8, that triggered a buyout evaluation in the event of a change in marital status. In plain terms, if we divorced, the process for valuing and distributing any marital interest in the business had already been defined, in writing, signed, filed, and legally binding. The clause did not cut her out. That would not have been legal, and it was not my intention. What it did was define the process in advance rather than leaving it to litigation, which meant the evaluation would follow the methodology we had specified, rather than whatever a divorce attorney might argue for in court. Dennis had explained this to me the first time we reviewed the operating agreement in year 8. He said, as a general principle of business law, that having a defined process in a dispute is almost always better than not having one, regardless of how the dispute resolves. I had signed it in year 8 without a specific scenario in mind. Just a man who builds things carefully and prefers defined processes to undefined ones. I pressed send on the third text and put the phone in my shirt pocket and stood on the porch and drank my coffee and listened to the oak tree. Sandra came out to the porch about 15 minutes later. She had pulled herself together quickly, which she was good at. She stood in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had already decided what the next conversation needed to look like. She said she was sorry for how she had said it, and she wanted to talk about what came next. I told her I had already started that process. She asked what I meant. I told her I had contacted Dennis. A pause. She knew Dennis. She had met him at the firm's Christmas party 3 years earlier, and liked him the way she liked most people she met professionally, with the even warmth that was her gift. She said she thought we should try counseling first. I told her I thought that was a reasonable idea, and that she should feel free to pursue it. She said she meant together. I looked at the oak tree. An acorn hit the woodshed roof. One sound, clean, finished. Sandra, I said, you told me money means nothing to him. I think what you meant is that his money means nothing to you. Mine is a different question. She went very still. I went inside and refilled my coffee. The 3 things in plain terms, because plain terms are more useful here than drama. The joint checking account held approximately $34,000 in household funds. Sandra's name was on it, and she had full access. Closing it and reopening in my name alone, with the balance transferred to a new account, was something Dennis had walked me through the legal process for during those 8 weeks. In Tennessee, marital funds require equitable distribution in a divorce, but the account itself could be restructured prior to a formal filing, with documentation of the action and its timing. Dennis filed that documentation. The property deed was more straightforward. The 11 acres and the house had been purchased in both names. A quitclaim deed, prepared in advance and notarized, transferred my interest in a way that, combined with the purchase history showing my down payment and primary mortgage payments, established a defensible argument for separate property treatment. It was not certain to hold in court. Dennis was clear about that, but it established a position. The letter was the third thing, and in some ways the simplest. A formal invocation of a clause in a document she had signed. Not an accusation, not a demand, just a notification that the clause existed and had been triggered, with the methodology document attached so her attorney would not be surprised about the process if divorce proceedings began. Sandra's attorney called Dennis 3 days later. Dennis told me the call was short. The attorney had reviewed the operating agreement. She had questions about the methodology clause. Dennis answered them. The attorney said she would be in touch. Dennis called me after and said one thing, "Cal, that clause is going to save you a significant amount of money and time." I told him I knew. He had told me that in year 8. I just had not known then what I was saving it from. The divorce took 11 months. 11 months of legal process is not a story, it is a procedure, and the procedure was what it was. The methodology clause held. Sandra's attorney challenged it twice, once on the grounds of unconscionability, once on a technical argument about the signature process. Dennis defended both successfully. The business was evaluated according to the defined methodology, and Sandra received her marital interest based on that evaluation, which was fair, and which Dennis had always said it was designed to be. She did not get $2.1 million. She got her proportional share of the marital interest in the business as defined by the agreement she had signed. A meaningfully smaller number, arrived at through a defined process rather than litigation, which meant both of us paid significantly less in legal fees than we would have otherwise. I kept the house. I kept the 11 acres. I kept the shop. She kept her car, her personal accounts, and Garrett. About Garrett, I will say only this. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sandra called me on a Sunday morning. She talked for about 8 minutes. She mentioned that Garrett had a different relationship with money than she had initially understood. I listened until she finished. Then I told her I hoped things worked out, and I meant it. I hung up and went to the shop. It is October now. The oak tree is at peak, which in Tennessee means the color is not the dramatic red of the Northeast, but a quieter gold that lasts about 10 days before the wind takes it. I have my coffee on the porch every morning at 6:15, and I watch the light come up over the woodshed. The shop has 14 employees now, 2 more than when Sandra left. We have a hotel project in East Nashville that will carry us through the first quarter of next year. My accountant and I reviewed the numbers in September. The business is in the best shape it has been in 23 years. Dennis sent me a bill for the divorce work last November with a handwritten note at the bottom. He writes notes at the bottom of bills, which is something I have always liked about him. The note said, "The clause worked exactly as designed. I thought you should know I have now used this structure for 4 other clients. Credit where it is due." I framed the note. It is on the wall of my office next to the shop, between a photo of the first cabinet I ever sold and a photo of the hotel lobby in Midtown from the project that changed the business. 3 things on a wall, each one the result of a decision made quietly, before anyone was watching, when the outcome was still uncertain. This story could be told as revenge. It is not. It is a story about preparation, about the difference between a man who builds things with defined tolerances and a man who discovers too late that he should have. Sandra found a soulmate. I hope he is what she believes he is. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I walked into the shop at 5:30 and turned on the lights and stood in the smell of sawdust and linseed and the quiet of a building that belongs entirely to you. I picked up a piece of white oak I had been setting aside for a commission, felt the grain under my thumb, knew exactly what I was going to make with it. That was the only thing I needed to know. The acorns are back on the woodshed roof, the coffee is on,